Hey there and welcome to Photoshop 301, Section 2, Warping and Scaling. In this section, we're going to cover all the different ways there are to warp and scale your images within Photoshop. We're going to go over general warping, which exists within the Transform tool. We're going to show you how to puppet warp your image, which is a lot of fun. You can grab different points on your images and drag them around. We're also going to cover the Liquify tool and content-aware scaling. It's going to be an awesome section, guys. Let's jump into Photoshop. The first thing we're going to do is open our image. Let's hit Control or Command O to open. Okay, we're going to go to Photoshop 301, Section 2 on Warping and Scaling. And here in our Images folder, we're going to look at O2 warp.tiff. So let's go ahead and open this up. F for full screen, and we're going to start off by actually breaking down our image so you guys can get an idea of how we created this. And this is one of my favorite images as a part of the series. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our background. So really simple background here. We've just got our color fill adjustment layer. Next, we've got our subject. So we've got subject 1 and subject 2. Now, these subjects were actually photographed. I'm going to hit Shift and click on our layer mask there. So you can see the subjects were actually photographed on a pink background, and they were photographed stepping on these stairs. Now, these were made relatively quickly for the photo shoot, and we went ahead and enhanced them a little bit in Photoshop to just make them look a little bit better. Okay, so let's hold down Shift, click there. There we go. We can see we have just a little bit of shadow fill there. And this layer we've used to basically paint in and extend the stairs. Okay, which I did basically by using the pen tool, making selections, and then creating the stairs and filling it in with the brush tool as well as the gradient tool. Okay, now we're going to take a look at subject 2. There we go. Basically the same idea here as in subject 1. All right, we've got our subject photographed here on some stairs there. This is just basically another version of that. We can actually delete that layer. Okay, so subject photographed on stairs, and then we went ahead and extended those stairs. You can see the stairs look great, you know, ahead of, like, straight out of camera. Like, they definitely serve their purpose for the photo shoot. And this happens all the time. Like, sometimes you'll use a prop for a photo shoot. You don't need it to be absolutely perfect because you plan on actually enhancing it in Photoshop. And that's kind of what we did here. So you can see the stairs, they look good. They're, again, could look a little bit better. So we enhanced those a little bit better just to kind of, well, you can make something look as perfect as you want within Photoshop. All right, and we actually are going to be building this image in a later section. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and take a look at the type in our image. All right, and that pretty much makes up our Queen of Hearts in this tutorial. All right, so that's the basic breakdown of how this image is actually made. Now let's go ahead and jump in and show you guys how to warp and scale. So we're going to start off this section with warping within the Transform dialog. So to get there, let's go ahead and start off. I'm going to create a new layer on top of everything. Okay, now we're going to go to Image, down to Apply Image. Okay, we want to make sure our layer says Merged. Basically, it's going to put a copy of everything it sees onto this layer. So you can see now we have one layer with everything on it. Okay, now let's go ahead and go over our warping that's contained within our Transform tool. So I'm going to hit Control or Command T to bring up our transform. Now, within our Transform tool, there are a lot of different types of warps and scaling that we can do. So by default, if you just want to make something smaller or larger, simply click on one of these corners here. There we go. And if you want to constrain proportion, just hold down the Shift key. Okay, and that's how we can make something larger or smaller. Now, we also have a few more warps that are located here. So we're going to go down to Edit, over to Transform, and then here are all of our transforms that are within our free transform dialog. So earlier when we hit Control or Command T, that's basically just goes to free transform, okay, which allows us to transform our image. Now here in transform we can see we have options for scaling, which is what we just did, rotating, which will allow us to, again, rotate our image. Now when you rotate, you can move your control point as well. So now I'm rotating around that control point. All right, let's go to Edit. There we go. Sorry, just undo that real quick. We'll go down to Skew. Now with Skew, basically you can grab any of your control points. There we go. And start to skew your image by moving your different control points in the corners. You can also skew from left to the right. There we go. Simply by grabbing one of these control points. All right, let's hit Escape there. Now we're going to go down to our perspective. And when I click on perspective, anytime I click on the corner here, it's going to automatically pull in the other corner as well, basically trying to have this push into perspective. So for instance, if you want to make it look like it's on a wall something like that, you can match perspective really easily using the perspective warp. All right, cool. And here we even have rotation within perspective. Okay, let's hit escape there. All right, and now we're going to go to transform, and here we hit our warp. So warping and scaling, this is our first warp. So this warp is a general warp. Now, without any presets, our presets are up here. Without any presets, basically you can click in any area of your photo and move it around, and it's going to create a mesh. You can see here's our mesh here, really simple mesh. We've got 9 squares there. And I can click and move any of these areas around, and it's going to allow me to move my mesh. Okay, we can also move our edges. There we are. And we can move our corners as well. Give it like a page flip type effect. That's kind of cool. Okay, so when we have an entire image like this, warping doesn't really make a ton of sense. You know, in this case, it's like, okay, well, why would you want to warp your entire image? Well, sometimes it can look kind of cool, but you can also do this on individual layers. So let's go ahead and escape right quick. I'm going to make that invisible. We're going to go to subject 1. Okay, so here's going to be our first subject. Now, in this case, we can choose just our subject or the entire group. Well, let's go ahead and choose just our subject. I'm going to duplicate our subject so we have a backup copy. Now we're going to go to edit and down to transform and over to warp. Okay, now rather than warping my entire image, let's make our underlying subject invisible. So edit, over to transform, and warp. So now we can warp just our subject. Now, warping is really great when you want to make sure that you affect your subject as a whole. All right, so for instance, if I would just want to bring her a little bit higher or a little bit lower, a general warp can be really, really nice. You can also pull the corners in because you do tend to get more natural transitions. Okay, so it's going to basically, even if I pull here, it's going to affect all the way over to this part of my image. So you can use this to change your subject's posture. You can use it to just, you know, kind of like push them in or pull them out. Sometimes I even make it look like people are a little bit taller with a general warp. Okay, now you also have options. Let's go ahead back. I'm going to hit Control Command T this time. We're going to right click and I'm going to go down to warp. So you can see if you hit Control Command T and then right click, it brings up the exact same menu that it does when you go to edit and then over here to transform. Okay, so here we are in warp. Now within our warp, we do have a few different options. So for instance, we could arc our subject. We could make our subject flag. These don't really come in that handy when you're actually working with the subject. Sometimes when you're working with type, these can be kind of cool. But in general, with the subject, they're not going to come in that handy. All right, but that's our first warp. And this warp can be really beneficial when you're trying to warp your subject as a whole. So if you want to move one part of them, but you want to make sure it affects the entire image as well, that's when you want to use a general warp. Now, this warp I actually use less than some of my other warps. So we're going to jump in and show you a puppet warp, which I actually prefer, especially when it comes to moving people around. All right, so for our puppet warp, we're going to do that on our other subject here. So let's go over to subject 2. All right, here we have our subject 2. Now I'm going to hit Control Command J to duplicate that subject. Okay, and now we're going to go into our puppet warping. So let's go to Edit and down to Puppet Warp. Okay, now with Puppet Warp, you can see basically we don't have any change just yet. I'm going to click on this Show Mesh. Okay, and now we have an idea of what this actually does. So it breaks your layer or your image into a mesh. Now in this case, we actually do have some of our background included in this selection because that's what my layer mask is. My layer mask does include a little bit of the background because that's part of basically including her shadow and other areas like that. In this case, it's going to be totally fine. So it basically breaks your image down into a mesh. So if your subject's cut out, whatever areas are cut out are going to be just that mesh. In this case, we have some of this over here. This is going to be our background as well. Okay, now the Puppet Warp is really easy to use. Basically, you just want to click a few times on your image. Now, the key here is to click on areas that actually control like joints and movement within an actual person or an object. So, for instance, if I was warping my arm here, I would want to put a point here on my elbow, okay, because that's a point of movement, and maybe here on my wrist, so I could have that as a point of movement as well. Okay, So in this case, let's go ahead and try it. I'm going to click here on our shoulder. We're going to click here again on our elbow, and I'm going to click here again on the hand. Okay, now let's go ahead and turn the show mesh. I'm going to turn that off really quick. So when we have our subject selected here, we've got a point on the shoulder, point on the elbow, and a point on the hand. So now if I click on the hand and move the hand, you can see basically I'm moving the hand, and it's going to move my body slightly as well, but it's using these different points as pivot points. Okay, now let's say we want most of the body to stay still. Well, I'm just going to add more points to other joints within our subject. And now, because those areas actually have firm points, they're not really going to move. So here we have an area where we can start to move our subject's hand. All right, let's go ahead and click on our subject's head right here in the middle, and I can start to move my subject's head a little bit as well. Okay, and everything, because basically we have a mesh. Let's turn that mesh back on. Basically, it's just kind of like warping and scaling whatever is inside of this mesh. All right, let's turn that back off, and we can see how this looks. So this is a really great tool when you want to get someone's like posture or pose. Maybe you want to change these things. Like, okay, let's bring her knee out just a little bit there. You can see her knee as I bring that out. It's starting to push her foot down though as well. So we'll just go ahead and click a couple times on her foot, and that's going to make sure that that stays put. So we can pull her knee out if we wanted to. There we go. And her foot's going to stay in place, which is really cool. Now in this case, let's say we want our, the lines in our, there we go. We want to, like for instance, I could have that come over there if we wanted. We basically, in this case, I want the lines of this arm to match up with the line of that arm. So I can click here and make subtle adjustments doing so. All right. Now, I would suggest doing this relatively subtly. It can make a huge impact on a photo when you want to like kind of move people around, but don't go too far. If you go too far, then you start to see stuff like this where you get arms that just start like bending really, really weird, and even too far, and you start to see something like that as well. So again, my advice for using this tool is most definitely give it a shot, because it's a very powerful tool. It's one of the best tools in Photoshop, in my opinion, because you can kind of like repose people, and even subtle adjustments can make a big difference. But that's the real key here, is to make these things subtle. And you can use these to like make a person's arms a little bit longer or legs a little bit longer and things like that. But again, my recommendation is keep things subtle, or people are going to start to look pretty weird pretty quick. All right, great. Now your density, you can also have this set to normal, which is where I would recommend. Fewer points is basically just going to make your mesh a little bit looser. Okay, so if you do this, we can see we're actually cutting off part of her hand there. All right, and more points, we're going to have, let's go ahead and show our mesh so you can see what our mesh looks like now. But in this case, it's going to be just a little bit more rigid. So I would suggest having your density set to normal. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and show that mesh. I'm going to hit this checkbox to apply our transformation. Here we go. Let's just zoom out, and here we can see there's the before and the after. So you can see even in the after, I mean, it's relatively difficult to tell that she was actually warped around, which is pretty cool that you can do this within Photoshop, especially sometimes when you're trying, some special creative effects, and you maybe need someone's hand to like reach a little bit longer, to reach out and grab someone else's hand. You can do that using the Puppet Warp. All right, plus it's just kind of a lot of fun to use here in Photoshop. All right, guys, so that's using our Puppet Warp. Next, we're going to jump in and show you the Liquify tool, which you can use for affecting smaller areas within your image. So we've taken a look at a few different types of warping. We did a general warp, which you can see affects your entire image. Next, we went down to the Puppet Warp, which we can use for moving like arms and legs, things like that. Next, we're getting even more honed in, and we're going to be looking at the Liquify tool, which you can use for things like smoothing areas out in your image. So let's go ahead and take a look. We're going to be using this exact same layer here. Okay, let's go ahead and click here, and I'm going to go to Filter and down to Liquify. Now, we touched on this briefly in Photoshop 201. Let's go ahead and zoom in by hitting Command+ a couple times. So, for instance, now if I want to move someone's entire arm, that's not the place, don't do that in the Liquify dialog. That's for a Puppet Warp. A Liquify is for something like this. Let's go ahead and zoom in to her, there we go, to her little dress here. And let's say I wanted this area to be a little bit more smooth. this is where we would use the liquefy tool. So in this case, we're going to be using our forward warp tool. This is right up here at the top left, and this is the tool that I use most often within my liquefy dialog. Basically, you just push and pull pixels around and basically tell them where you want them to go. All right, relatively simple to use. So within our forward warp tool, we have a few options. Our size controls your brush size. Okay, density is how much of it affects basically towards the center or towards the edges, and pressure is how much of an effect you're going to make on your image. Well, let's go ahead and say we want this area to be a little bit smoother. What I'm going to do is start by clicking outside of our piece of clothing here and start moving in just a little bit. Okay, now you can see this area here, for instance, right in the center there, it's still pushing in, but if I simply use this large size, it's not going to work. So I need to go ahead and make my size a little bit smaller here. There we go, that's too small. Now you can use keyboard shortcuts for making your brush larger and smaller, the same as the regular brush keyboard shortcuts. In this case, I'm going to hold Control and Option and click and drag from the left to the right. There we go. Now we're going to click in the inside here and kind of bring that point out. All right, there we go. Let's make our brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to kind of bring that point back in and that one back out there. So liquefying is basically like warping on a pixel level. Okay, so you can see you can affect areas from the large all the way to the small. All right, but I would not recommend trying to warp your entire image or your entire subject with the liquefy tool. That's where the other warps come in. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and see if we can make this a little bit more of a point there. All right. Cool. Looking good. So let's go ahead and hit OK there. All right. And zooming in a couple times, let's just look. There we go. Here's our before and the after. So just a real quick way to do things like straighten out those lines. Now you can also use it on people as well. For instance, if we just hit Shift-Command-X, which is the keyboard shortcut for the liquefy tool. Sometimes people use the liquefy tool for things like making people's eyebrows perk up just a little bit. If you're going to be doing this on a person's face, be very, very subtle here. There's not you can make a huge. I mean, you can do something like that very easily and totally ruin someone's day. So little things like that are definitely used. Oftentimes, if you make people's necks just a little bit thinner, it can make their necks look longer. Okay, which can be preferable, especially in like high fashion and things like that. You can use this for smoothing out like joints and things like that. There we go, just kind of like smoothing it just a little bit. You know, you don't want to destroy the integrity of an individual, but sometimes a little bit of smoothing can be visually appealing. Okay, and then you can also use this for bringing in people's like waists and things like that. In this case, we don't really have an application for that, but you could most definitely, let's grab a larger brush there and maybe, you know, make this dress just fit a little bit tighter. I mean, it's, you know, obviously we don't have any room to bring out a waist here, but you can definitely change the shape of someone's body using this tool as well. So let's hit OK there. All right, and here we have the before and the after. So again, subtle adjustment there. I actually like the before better in this case, but subtle adjustments that you can make on your subject, and that's basically down for pushing and pulling different areas of your subject. So that's the liquefy tool. You can see how it's a little bit different in effect from the general warp or the puppet warp. All right, the last thing we're going to look at is our content-aware scale. Now, content-aware scale is really cool. Basically, the idea here is you can scale your image larger and smaller, okay, both horizontally and vertically, and you can choose specific areas to protect. In other words, if you don't want your subject to be scaled, but you want the rest of your image to be scaled, this is where you can use the content-aware scale. All right, let's go ahead and show you guys how this works. So to show you, we're going to go ahead and create a new document. I'm going to hit F, okay, a couple of times for a full screen. Next, our layer here at the top that I used, this is my apply image layer. Remember, I went to image and down to apply image. We're going to right click here. I'm going to go down to duplicate layer, and I'm going to go down to a new document. So let's go ahead and hit OK there. All right. Now with this new document, I just want to crop out just a little bit. So I'm going to hit C for my crop tool. You know what? I'm going to hit F for full screen real quick. C for my crop tool and give myself just a little bit more space to work with. Okay. Now let's say we want to stretch our image out just a little bit wider. Now, normally what you would do is hit Control or Command T for your transform and stretch it out. Okay, now certain areas, whenever you do that, are going to look just fine. My steps, they look just fine. You know, even the queue looks just fine. But our subject, not so much. All right, let's hit Control or Command J. We're going to do this a couple of times to show you how the content aware scale works. Okay, let's go ahead and start off by default. So we're going to go to Edit and down to Content Aware Scale. Okay, now we have some options here at the top for our width and our height. Here's our scaling. Right now we're going to say protect none and we're going to leave this guy off. We'll show you those options in just a second. So now we're going to click and drag, and you can see basically Photoshop's trying to do its best from right here to here. It hasn't affected my subjects at all. So it's trying to do its best job to maintain all the detail that it can in a photo. Now as I start to pull out from here, you can it's still doing a pretty decent job protecting detail in the photo, but let's hit enter there. You can see it has decided that her arm and her leg is really not that important. So it's went ahead and warped those out in a way that we don't want. So let's go ahead and hit undo. Now let's try the same thing again. We're going to go to Edit, down to Content Aware Scale. And here where it says Protect, okay, right here it's going to say None, but you can click on your skin tones here. Basically this is going to try to detect skin tones and protect those. So let's see how that works. So as I bring this out, you can see it's like really doesn't think that that hair is skin at all. So it's really warping that quite a bit. And you know what? It's actually kind of like worse in this case when we hit the protect skin tones. It's actually, I think, not doing as good of a job there. So let's go ahead and hit undo one more time. Now there is something else that we can do. And that's actually using our channels. So let's go ahead and start off. I'm going to show you how to create a new channel here. Now, we're going to start off by creating just a new layer. Okay? And in this case, I'm just going to paint with white, there we go, on our new layer. And I'm going to paint right over top of our subject. And basically, what I'm doing now is I'm telling this tool, the Content Aware Scale, I'm telling the tool what to protect. In other words, anywhere that I paint on this layer, we've got a couple more steps to get there, but basically my goal here is wherever I'm painting, I'm basically telling Photoshop not to transform that area. You can do anything else, just don't scale this. All right, almost done here. All right, zoom out a little bit there. Now I'm doing this like pretty generally. We've just got a soft edge brush here, and I'm just painting in the area that I don't want selected. Now if you wanted to make a finer selection, for instance using like the pen tool and actually making an accurate selection right around your subject, you could do that as well. Okay, so basically I'm defining the area that I don't want selected. That's kind of funny actually. What we're going to do is now load this, okay? We're going to load that into a channel. So to do so, let's hold Control or Command and click on this layer, which is going to simply turn that layer into a selection. Next, we're going to go to our channels, and I'm going to click on a new channel. This is called Alpha 1 now. And then here in this area, I'm going to hit Shift Delete, and we're going to fill this with white. So on our new channel, we're going to fill that with white and hit Command D to deselect. Okay, so we've got this channel. It's stored with the information of our subject. Now when we go to our Content Aware Scale, we're going to tell it to protect this channel. All right, so let's go ahead and try that again. We're going to go back to our layers. Okay, this layer here, Edit, down to Content Aware Scale. And here where it says Protect, I'm going to choose Alpha 1. Okay, because that's the channel we just made. So now, as I move this around, you're going to see it is going to scale all parts of my image except for alpha 1. It's not going to touch alpha 1 at all. All right? Well, you can see it did just a tiny bit actually there on the arm, but for the most part, it did keep the alpha in place. So let's see if we can do both. I'm going to turn this back visible again, and then, you know what, I'm going to hit Controller Command J on this. We can see if I can just rotate this guy around and put it on our other subject, probably for the most part anyway. All right, let's just erase that away. All right, let's see if I can protect just my subjects here and see if it's going to allow me to scale the rest of the image without affecting my subjects. Again, I'm not expecting it to work perfectly, but I guess that's kind of pessimistic of me. So I am expecting it to work perfectly. All right, so let's go ahead and I made that a selection. Let's click on our channels now. Back on our alpha channel, okay? I'm going to hit Shift Delete, and we're going to fill that with white. Okay, cool. So now we see that's what our channel actually looks like. Okay, back to our layers here. There we go. That's what our channel looks like, the black and white there. So back to our layers here. Now I'm going to go to Edit, down to Content Aware Scale. Okay, and say the same channel, alpha 1, and now it should be protecting both of my subjects. So as we scale out, there we're going to see. All right, looks like we had a little bit too much information for it to protect. Looks like it's saying, you know what, I don't have enough information to protect both of your subjects. Let's go ahead and try it vertically. All right, it's doing an okay job, but it is pulling some information from our subjects. All right, so we can see not a perfect tool, still in my opinion much better than just doing a regular transform, so Controller Command T, because it's not going to try to protect anything at all. But the content aware, let's go to Edit, down to Content Aware Scale. This will do a pretty good job protecting your subjects. All right, here let's just make sure. There we go. We unclick Skin and go to our alpha channel. And there we go. Pretty good job. Now we can see, in this case, I did make this image a lot wider. Pretty good. It basically warped out her arm just a little bit, and a little bit here on the dress, and a little bit on that dress. But other than that, it did a really good job actually warping that out. And that's a pretty big transformation. So I think the content aware scale does work really, really well. It's not perfect, but it does definitely work well. All right, cool. And this can be used, now in this case we had two different subjects in this image, and it's kind of a complex image. But if you had a subject on a beach and, like, let's say you had a large sky and you just wanted to add more sky, that would be a perfect application for the content aware scale tool, because it's not so dense with information in like a sky or a beach or something like that, where it actually can start to stretch that area out. So if you do have a background that you want to extend, content aware scale tool works very well. All right, guys, so that wraps up our section on warping and scaling. So you can see how each of these different tools gives you a slightly different area to warp. So again, when you want to edit an entire layer at a time, hit Controller Command T, right click, and then go down to warp. Now, if you just want to affect areas like a person's arm, you want to move that, that's going to be your puppet warp. If you want to bring an area in, like for instance, if you want to make my neck look like it's a little bit skinnier, or, you know, change my elbow or something like that, or piece of clothing, that's going to be your liquify tool. And then if you want to stretch an entire image out, you can use your content aware scale, and then you can go ahead and paint an area into an alpha channel and have it protect those areas. All right, thanks so much, guys. We'll see you in the next section. Bye, everyone.